I froze as the laughter swallowed me whole, my face burning hotter than I thought possible. Everyone I had trusted, the people I considered family, was pointing, snickering, and whispering as if I had just done something unforgivable. And in the middle of it all, she was grinning like the world belonged to her and she had just claimed it. My own sister. I'm 29, living in Boston, working as a marketing strategist for a small but reputable firm downtown. I'm usually calm, measured, careful with my words and my reactions. But that evening at my birthday dinner, all of that control evaporated. She had been visiting from out of state for the weekend, claiming it was a family celebration, but I should have known better. She had this way of twisting the truth to make her presence feel like a gift, and then wielding it like a weapon. We'd had a complicated history, my sister and I. She was 4 years older, sharp, ambitious, and utterly charming when she wanted to be. I had always admired her from afar, even envied her. But admiration is a dangerous thing when it's laced with fear. Because behind her smiles, behind the way she drew people in, she had a sharp edge that could cut deeper than any argument. She loved seeing me falter, and she had done it many times before, but never like this. That night, I had invited a small group of friends and family to a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect in its simplicity, with soft lighting, the hum of conversation, and a table full of people who genuinely liked me. Until she arrived. She had brought her friends, people I barely knew, who had the kind of laugh that fills a room with mockery rather than joy. And within minutes she started. First, it was subtle. A remark about my new job, the kind that sounds innocent until it lands and bruises. Then a comment about my apartment, my dating life, my lack of ambition, compared to her own high-flying career. I smiled, tried to laugh it off, but the words were knives disguised as jokes. Then came the moment that will haunt me forever. She picked up the gift I had carefully chosen for myself, a limited edition watch I'd been saving for months, and said loudly, "Oh, is this really what you like? I thought someone your age would go for something more tasteful." She let her laugh trail through the room, her eyes sparkling with triumph, while everyone else looked on, unsure where to look or what to say. I remember gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles whitened. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to scream, to throw her words back in her face. But something inside me stopped. Something that had been building for years, a quiet understanding that she thrived on my reaction, that my defense, my anger, was her fuel. And for the first time, I realized that fighting her in the moment would only make me smaller. Instead, I smiled. A tight, controlled smile that didn't reach my eyes. I set the watch down, excused myself politely, and walked to the restroom. In that silence, I let the humiliation sit, not like a wound I had to lick immediately, but like a seed I would water carefully. When I returned, the evening continued as if nothing had happened. She made a few more barbed comments, each punctuated by her laugh, each aimed at eroding my confidence. But I didn't rise to the bait. I nodded, I smiled politely, and I let her believe she had one. On the drive home later, my mind replayed every word, every smirk, every glance. And for the first time, instead of feeling small, I felt curious. Curious about what it would take for her to lose the power she wielded so effortlessly. I knew it wouldn't be a confrontation. She fed on drama, on spectacle. The only way to truly undo her would be quietly, invisibly, in a way she could never anticipate. I started with boundaries, simple ones at first. I stopped responding to her late-night texts that were thinly veiled criticisms. I declined invitations where I knew she would be the center of attention, the spotlight she used to make me feel invisible. And I began documenting mentally at first the patterns of her behavior, the way she subtly manipulated those around her. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about understanding her weapon so I could neutralize it without firing back with fire. Weeks passed. I immersed myself in my work, in friendships that felt safe and genuine, and in personal projects I had long neglected. I noticed something remarkable. The more I withdrew from her orbit, the less influence she had over me. I was no longer reacting. I was observing. And the world, remarkably, still rotated around me. Then the opportunity came unexpectedly. A mutual friend, someone who had always admired my sister's charm, called me. They were planning a collaborative project that required attention to detail, reliability, and discretion. And they asked me to join. My sister had been angling to lead the project, of course, assuming she would naturally take the helm. She didn't realize that I now held the leverage. My skills, my reputation, my network. She believed she controlled the narrative, but I held the cards quietly, carefully, in silence. I knew the moment to act would come at a meeting where both of us were present. I prepared meticulously, ensuring every piece of data, every plan, every presentation was flawless. When the meeting happened, my sister tried her usual tactics, interruptions, jokes at my expense, subtle digs at my competence. But I didn't flinch. I didn't engage. I let her speak while I listened calmly, and then I presented my work. Every figure, every insight, every recommendation was precise, thoughtful, and undeniable. By the time I finished, the room had shifted. My sister's energy, once magnetic, now felt erratic, unanchored. Her attempts to reclaim control faltered in the face of quiet competence and preparation. She could not argue with facts, with clarity, with the understated authority I now wielded. And I realized in that moment that revenge wasn't about shouting or exposing, or humiliating her as she had done to me. It was about presence, about power regained through dignity. And as the project lead naturally shifted toward me, because competence cannot be argued with, she froze, the first time I had ever seen hesitation flicker across her face. Not humiliation, not outrage, but a subtle creeping awareness that her influence was gone. She was still in the room, still speaking, but no one listened the way they had before. And I didn't gloat. I simply acknowledged her contributions, subtly, politely, and carried the conversation forward with calm authority. It was then I understood the truth. Revenge through dignity is not about the moment. It's about the long game. It's about reclaiming yourself while letting the world do the correcting. She had humiliated me, yes, but I had endured, observed, and emerged with control she could never reclaim. After that meeting, I felt a shift not just in the office but in myself. I realized that my sister's power over me had always been partly imaginary. I had given it to her through reaction, through fear, through the need to be liked. Once I stopped feeding that hunger, her control faltered naturally. But I knew I wasn't done. True, irreversible change required more than competence. It required detachment, strategy, and patience. I began to distance myself socially as well. Family events became neutral territory. I attended only when necessary, and even then, I carved a quiet, invincible space around myself. I stopped volunteering personal details that she could twist, and I ceased responding to her provocations with emotion. What was once a battlefield became a calm zone where she had no ammunition. It was difficult at first. I felt almost guilty, withdrawing from shared history and memories, as if cutting her out would hurt me as well. But slowly, the relief became tangible. I could breathe without anticipating her next dig, her next pointed comment. And the people around me, friends, extended family, colleagues, noticed. They began to treat me differently, not because I sought attention, but because my presence was now solid, grounded, unassailable. People were drawn to stability, not theatrics, and I embodied that. Then, an unexpected opportunity arrived. Our family business, which had always been her playground of influence, needed someone to oversee an operational audit. My parents assumed she would naturally take the role. She always had, in their eyes, the golden touch. But the situation had shifted. I had quietly built credibility in our professional networks, and they came to me instead. She was furious, of course. I could see it in the slight narrowing of her eyes when I accepted the responsibility. She tried the usual tactics: charm, subtle digs, veiled criticisms, even the occasional guilt trip. But I had learned something crucial. She could not survive in my silence. My calm, my preparation, my indifference, these were the very forces that unbalanced her. I approached the audit methodically, meticulously, and without fanfare. I discovered inefficiencies she had ignored, mismanaged contracts she had overseen, and opportunities for improvement she had failed to capitalize on. Every recommendation I made was precise, actionable, and invisible to any personal bias. She tried to interject, to claim credit, but the facts were unarguable, the results undeniable. Her frustration became palpable, and in private, I could see the subtle panic in her eyes. For the first time, she was aware that her influence wasn't absolute. The room no longer bent to her will. It responded to structure, evidence, and consistent competence, the things I now embodied effortlessly. But I still didn't confront her directly. The beauty of this revenge was in the invisibility. I didn't need to humiliate her as she had humiliated me. I didn't need to orchestrate public spectacle. I simply ensured she no longer held power, no longer commanded attention, no longer had access to the levers she relied on to manipulate everyone around her. The quietest victory of all came during the annual family gathering. She arrived expecting to dominate conversations, to orchestrate everyone's attention, to remind the room that she was the center of the universe. Instead, I was there, confident, composed, prepared, and the energy had shifted. People listened to me first, consulted me for advice, and sought my opinion on matters she had once monopolized. She tried, desperately, to reclaim her place, but the room no longer responded. Her attempts were polite but hollow, her laughter forced and slightly off-key. She was present, yet absent, powerful in appearance only, powerless in reality. And it struck me how easy it was. Not because I had shouted louder or schemed harder, but because I had removed her weapon, my reaction. Humiliation thrives on engagement, on emotion, on surrender. Silence and competence are their natural antidote. I had taken back my dignity, my presence, my power, one small deliberate step at a time. The final act of quiet justice came unexpectedly. My sister had always relied on my emotional investment to validate her victories. But when she realized I no longer cared, when she tried to pull me into petty rivalries or comparisons, she met only indifference. I didn't scold, I didn't expose, I didn't retaliate. I simply lived. My time, energy, and attention were now mine. She could attempt to pierce that calm, but there was nothing to grab. My detachment became her erasure. Friends, colleagues, and family began to notice. They commented subtly on my composure, on the way I seemed unshakable, on the quiet authority I now held. No one applauded or celebrated her diminished role, because life is rarely so dramatic, but the effect was irreversible. The spaces she had dominated for years no longer belonged to her. She could act, but no one followed. She could speak, but no one truly listened. I realized then that revenge, in its most satisfying form, is not about spectacle. It's about reclaiming yourself inch by inch, day by day, until the person who sought to diminish you can no longer find leverage. It is patient, meticulous, and quiet, but ultimately it is unstoppable. She had humiliated me, yes, but her victories had always been temporary. Mine, grounded in dignity and composure, would endure. And in that endurance I found something even more powerful than vindication. Freedom. Freedom from her judgments, her mockery, her relentless comparisons. Freedom from the need to justify myself or prove worth. I could exist fully in my own right, and that quiet presence, that invisible victory, became the ultimate revenge. Months passed, and the pattern solidified. My sister's attempts at control had lost all effectiveness. She would make a comment here or there, try to charm someone or subtly undermine me, but it was like tossing pebbles against a steel wall. Nothing penetrated. The more she tried, the more her frustration showed, not in anger, but in quiet, creeping helplessness. And I watched it unfold without a trace of gloating. That would have been childish. True victory doesn't need to announce itself. The final confirmation came at a family wedding, a high-profile affair that had always been her stage. She arrived early, perfectly dressed, hair immaculate, eyes scanning for attention. I noticed how she subtly maneuvered through the crowd, trying to establish dominance, trying to catch someone's admiration. But the difference was palpable. People approached me first, sought my opinion, asked me questions. When she attempted to interject, they politely deferred or ignored her entirely. Her performance had lost its audience. I didn't intervene. I didn't orchestrate her humiliation. I let her navigate the room and its social currents alone. Watching her, I realized the cruel irony. All the charm, all the manipulation, all the calculated presence she had perfected over decades was now ineffective, not because I had exposed her, not because I had retaliated, but because I had stopped feeding it. My withdrawal was the final severing of power she had relied on. Later that evening, we ended up at the same table for dinner. She tried her usual routine, smiles that carried an edge, subtle jabs, the occasional feigned curiosity about my life. I responded with calm, neutral interest, acknowledging facts without emotion, participating in conversations without giving her leverage. She faltered in ways that were almost imperceptible to anyone else, yet completely obvious to me. For the first time, she realized that she could no longer bend reality to her will. Her empire of influence, the one I had quietly watched her build and maintain, had dissolved simply because I had stopped playing my assigned role in it. On the drive home, I reflected on the journey. Revenge had never been about a single moment of triumph or dramatic exposure. It had been a slow reclamation of self, a strategic withdrawal from the behaviors and reactions that had given her power. Every decision to step back, every refusal to argue or explain, every act of preparation and competence had been part of a chain reaction that culminated in her quiet defeat. She had lost not because I shouted louder, but because I stopped participating in her game. I also understood something deeper. Revenge through dignity transforms the avenger more than the target. I had become steadier, more self-assured, more capable of handling challenges without fear or impulsivity. The humiliation she inflicted could have left a permanent mark, but instead, it became the catalyst for my growth. Her actions, meant to wound, had trained me in patience, self-control, and strategic thinking. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Her desire to diminish me had, in the end, elevated me. The ultimate lesson revealed itself in silence. She could still smile, still charm, still circulate in social settings, but she no longer held authority or influence over me, or over anyone who mattered. She existed in the same room as me, but the invisible hierarchy had shifted permanently. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I was living my life fully with calm assurance, and she could not alter that. I think about that night at my birthday dinner often. The raw humiliation, the laughter, the public spectacle, it could have defined me. For a moment it almost did. But through patience, reflection, and quiet action, I transformed it into something else. Freedom. Freedom from her power, freedom from the need to react, freedom to be myself unapologetically. And in that freedom, I found a satisfaction deeper than any shout of vindication could have provided. There's a lesson here that I hope others will understand. When someone seeks to humiliate you, to diminish you, or to control your emotions, the most devastating and lasting response is not confrontation, it's detachment. It's the quiet reclamation of your own authority, your own dignity, and your own space. It's the understanding that power lies not in reaction but in presence, in consistency, and in self-respect. And so my sister continues her life, performing for an audience that no longer exists. I continue mine quietly, confidently, fully alive in my own right. The revenge I sought was never about her suffering, it was about removing her ability to dictate my experience. Every time I smile, speak, or act without fear or obligation, I exercise it. Every decision I make in calm, deliberate silence is a reminder that her humiliation, once directed at me, has been rendered powerless. In the end, it was never about winning in the way she expected. It was about living in a way she could not influence, control, or diminish. And that, more than any dramatic confrontation, more than any public exposure, is the kind of victory that lasts forever.